What's up everyone? John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo here with a full review for you of the Android tablet that's kicking off the honeycomb craze. Full review for you of Google's first foray into the world of tablets. This is the Nexus 7. Brand new 2013 Nexus 7. This is the latest tablet to come out of Google. It is the Nexus 9. I love a good fight. iOS versus Android, Samsung versus Apple, Ford versus Chevy, Lakers versus the rest of the NBA. And those battles generally play out over decades, with one company taking one round, the next company taking another. Very rarely is there a clear-cut winner. And even more rare than that is a huge billion-dollar company laying down their sword and saying, I give up. But that just happened. Apple has won the tablet war. Google officially threw in the towel. So I need to be clear, this isn't the end of Android tablets. It is the end of Google-made Android tablets. The Nexus line, the Pixel line, and anything that came in between. But how we got to this point is a fascinating story.
And we call it the iPad.
So April 2010, to the surprise of no one, rumored for years, Apple unveiled the iPad, which was essentially a giant version of the iPhone. And consumers loved that. They were bought by the millions, and the iPad was a success. So that model seemed destined to translate over to Android. So that's what Samsung did. In September of that year, the Galaxy Tab came out, and that was a larger version of Android on a bigger screen. In fact, in some markets, it even launched with phone support. So that's what it was at the time, was a giant version of Android. It launched with Froyo, but Google wasn't set on Froyo or even Gingerbread as the platform for Android tablets. It wasn't until the next year, 2011, that we saw Android Honeycomb. And that was Google's response. Almost a year after the introduction of the iPad, Google said, here is how we envision tablets to be. Here's our version of what a tablet should look like. So oddly, this tablet wasn't made by Google. It wasn't a Nexus, it wasn't a Pixel. It was made by Motorola, and it was called the Xoom with an X. And this was a big deal. This is how Google envisioned the tablet interface. They changed what widgets could do. They changed the home screen. They changed the look and feel of the OS. I remember going into Best Buy to pre-order the Xoom, and I was pretty hyped on it, as were a lot of people. It looked awesome on paper. So pre-orders came in, I went to Best Buy, picked up my Xoom, I got home and started playing with it, and it was very clear that it was not ready for prime time. I had more app crashes than I ever had on any version of Android. Widgets weren't performing as they should, but perhaps the biggest problem was it was being dubbed as an LTE connected device. But if you want the LTE to work, not only did you have to wait several months, but you had to send the tablet back to Motorola themselves, wait, and then get it back, and then LTE would be working. That was not a model that was built for success. And Google, to their credit, recognized it. Honeycomb was made just for tablets and still goes on record as the shortest lived version of Android ever. But maybe that was a harbinger of things to come. Since Honeycomb, we never saw another attempt from Google to make a dedicated tablet OS. After Honeycomb and starting with Ice Cream Sandwich, it was always that main phone OS tweaked to work on a bigger screen. So Google was clearly down after the Xoom. I'm gonna call it a debacle. But a little over a year later, they answered, and they answered big with the Nexus 7. Rockin' Jelly Bean, this was the Android tablet experience that should have been from the get-go. Not only did it work as advertised, it was an amazing experience. You got giant widgets on a beautiful home screen. You got a tablet that performed as it should and didn't have to be sent back to get features to be enabled. And the unique thing about the Nexus 7 was it filled a niche that didn't exist. If you wanted a tablet, it was the iPad at 10 inches. This was a smaller tablet form factor before phones got gigantic. You could see having a 3.5-inch phone or a 4-inch phone and a 7-inch tablet were very complementary, and it made sense for a lot of people, including myself, to use a Nexus 7. So what started with the original Nexus 7 of being solid, well-made, really good tablets continued. There was another version of the Nexus 7 that was equally well received. Google went a little bigger. We saw the Samsung-made Nexus 10, incredibly well-received tablet. I enjoyed it, I switched to it. People liked the Nexus experience on tablets. So I mentioned it at the beginning, one of the beauties of Android is that it's open. It can be whatever manufacturers want it to be. But that can also be a detriment. So Android works on different screen sizes by various manufacturers, and by default, it'll work. It'll scale up and down depending on the screen being used. And that was the case with the tablets too, whether it was a Nexus 7, Nexus 10, whether it was a tablet made by a different manufacturer, the apps would get big or small depending on what was being used. And that sounds great on paper, but the end user experience wasn't always so great. We ended up with giant phone apps that weren't scaled properly, and developers, because Android scaled itself, weren't really incentivized or perhaps didn't care to make their apps be tablet optimized. And the ones that were was a much smaller field that we saw coming from Apple and the iPad. So after the success of the Nexus 7 and the Nexus 10, that's when things started to go downhill for the Google-made tablets. 2014, the Nexus 9 came out, and on its own was a fine tablet. It continued the lineage that the 7 and the 10 put out before it. But 2014, the tablet market was very different. The iPad was maturing. There was various other Android tablets available. There was nothing about the Nexus 9 that stood out. The experience wasn't better than any other out there. It was just one that happened to be made by Google. So if we move forward a little over a year to December 2015, Google shifted from the Nexus line to the Pixel line. We got the amazing Pixel phone, so it made sense that we ultimately would see a Pixel tablet. That's absolutely what we got with the Pixel C. But this is where things got weird. It's come out after the fact, and it seemed very apparent to anybody who bought one or used one. This was made to run Google's relatively new at the time, Chrome OS. And Chrome OS still had some touch components, but it wasn't yet optimized for full touch, so Google instead opted to put Android on it. What we got was an aesthetically beautiful tablet with an end user experience that seemed half-baked. So all these little negatives started to add up to a much bigger picture for Google, but oddly what seemed to really be the death blow for the Google-made tablets was their own product line. The rise of Chrome OS will be remembered as what killed Android tablets. It wasn't until almost the end of 2018 October where we saw the next Google-made tablet. But in between, Google really started to cozy up to Chrome OS and make it a full-fledged operating system. And we saw some amazing Chrome OS products come out from third parties. We also saw Google make their own. The Pixelbook, for example, is an amazing computer, albeit very expensive, but one that gave an excellent touch experience. I love the Pixelbook, I used it, I recommended it. It was an excellent end user experience. It was everything that the Pixel tablets beforehand weren't. But the Pixelbook, while it did flip around, was more of a traditional laptop that could do some tablet things. October 2018, we got the Pixel Slate. And this was not running Android. This is sort of what Google always imagined tablets to be, presumably, running Chrome OS that also supported Android apps. And in theory, this sounds like the absolute best experience consumers can have. You get an amazing Chrome OS experience with the incredible app ecosystem of Android. It is a best of both worlds experience. And on paper, it sounds incredible. But like real life, sometimes on paper, it doesn't translate. What we ended up getting, we got a buggy, slow experience that didn't deliver on the promise to consumers of an excellent tablet experience. And there are very few products that come out in the market that are universally panned. And the Pixel Slate was one of those products. And about 8 months later, Google announced what I think we all saw coming. They were laying down their sword and saying, we are exiting the tablet marketplace. Plain and simple, Apple won. There are other manufacturers still making Android tablets. If you look at their slice of the pie, it's very small compared to the millions of units that Apple is selling all over the world. So Google's out of the tablet battle, but the war might not be over. Just the battlefront might be changing. With Google exiting the tablet space, they're free to refocus themselves again on the awesomeness that can be Chrome OS. I mentioned the Pixelbook and how good that experience was. They already told us a sequel to that is coming. With that team focusing on what that Pixelbook can be and should be, the potential for Chrome OS is wide open. We might get that experience that we were promised. The beauty of Chrome OS, the app experience of Android, married into one incredible, beautiful form factor is what a lot of people are looking for. Is it the answer to not having to use Windows or pay for a Windows laptop or not spend the money for a Mac laptop? You might get the perfect laptop experience with a little bit of tablet action thrown in.